When the news that Cassian Andor was receiving his own spin-off show, I don't think I could have shown any less interest than I did. In fact, with all the new Disney Plus Star Wars shows coming out, this was one that I did not care about in the slightest. See, in my mind, we didn't need any more stories about the early rebellion. This timeline in Star Wars has been beaten to death. How many more possible times could they retell the same story about the birth of the rebellion, or the spark, or whatever? Let alone with Cassian Andor at the face of it. Don't get me wrong, Rogue One is one of the greatest Star Wars movies of all time. I just found the main cast kind of forgettable. In fact, before Andor was being teased, I couldn't even have told you this guy's name. I could barely remember that Jyn Erso was the name of the main freaking character. But I actually kind of liked that. It really spoke to how good the movie was, in the sense that it was a group of forgettable nobodies who brought down the start of the fall of the Empire. It was the fact that all of these weak and powerless civilians, not even soldiers, that was so inspiring in the first place. But a spin-off about one of these nobodies? I don't know. He was good in Rogue One, but his character kind of felt flat in my opinion. Plus, we knew he was going to die in the end. I felt his exciting character story had already been told in Rogue One. How could I possibly care any more about him? Well, I was wrong. Andor made me care. It took me a couple weeks to get around to actually watching Andor. Like I said earlier, I didn't really care. But once I started it, I was hooked into it. I was worried that it being directed by someone who didn't even like Star Wars was going to make it less good. But man, it was a refreshing take on it. And in my opinion, it had that ever-elusive Star Wars feel to it. It reminded me that Star Wars at its core is about hope. It brought me back to my roots of caring about the rebellion, and the show really did justice in showing how freaking hard it was for them to get the movement going, and just how much was at stake. How much each individual risked just to scrape the surface of the Empire. A New Hope felt like its own origin story, about the rise of the rebellion. But now after seeing Andor, I'm learning that it's more like seeing them at their peak. It was super cool to see them chip away at the Empire and build momentum with these monumental and unlikely victories over them. I loved how gritty the feel of the show was. I loved seeing how not so innocent the leaders of this rebellion were, and how they had to get their hands dirty so that these righteous heroes down the road could succeed and get the glory. I've heard some complaints about the pacing of the show being too slow or too long, but honestly, I really enjoyed it. At first I was worried 12 episodes was going to be too long for this simple story, but by the end I was wanting more. I really felt that first Wednesday, the week after the show finished. The characters for the most part were strong and well portrayed. Cassian Andor had this mysterious vibe about him that kept me wanting more. I liked the fact that he was reluctant to do any sort of good from the get-go. He was motivated purely by selfish ambition. I wouldn't even say that by the end he was a totally different person either. He just kept getting himself into trouble, and the whole show we see him trying to dig himself out of the hole he was in. Yes, he always strived to do the right thing, but in the end, I didn't get the vibe yet that he wants to destroy the Empire. First he wanted to make money, then he needed to bust his own ass out of prison, then at the end it was a rescue mission for someone he cares about and a bit of a redemption story for his mother. I feel his character development is maybe half of where it needs to be before Rogue One even starts. But despite that, his character was incredibly interesting from start to finish, so props to the actor and the writers. Like I said, most of the characters felt strong, but left me wanting a little more. I don't know if that's the show being lackluster or if it's a great setup for the next season. I don't feel disappointed but excited for more, so I think that's a good state for the show to be in. However, some of the characters felt kind of flat or unnecessary. The show did a great job making us care about Ferrix, and I did like how they expanded on the people living in it. However, there were times I felt like there were too many people being introduced, and at some points I had to remind myself of who I was watching at different times and what the relevance was for the story. I think that was one area that the show could have improved on. I have to talk about the soundtrack. I've heard some mixed feelings about it, but I freaking loved it. The main theme of this show is now easily one of my favorite Star Wars soundtracks. It had so much emotion in it. I think it's going to be one of those scores that always gives me goosebumps when I hear it now. Phenomenal job on that one. I want to touch on a couple plot points before we wrap up this video. I loved Aldhani and the whole setup of the Empire's presence there. It really made you hate them early on. Also, heists are one of my favorite plot lines ever of any movie, and I think it was really freaking well executed here. Another one of my favorite plot lines is prison escapes, which the show also had. In fact, I would say that the escape from Narcana 5 is my favorite part of this whole show. For time's sake, I'll get into why that is in the next episode of Rebel Jedi Podcast, so be sure to tune into that one. I liked Ferrix, but I did feel the plot points around it kind of dragged in this show. I like that it set up all of Cassian's connections and relationships, which were his major motivators near the end of the show. so I think they were important. I just think that they could have probably just focused on his relationship with his mother, and I think that would have been good enough without all of his coworkers and ex-girlfriends and so on. I like the complexity of it, but like I said, it did drag a little bit. The final battle on Ferrix was really well done and fun to watch. All in all, this show feels like a win to me. Was this a Star Wars story that needed to be told? Absolutely not. But I did enjoy watching it, and maybe that's good enough. Maybe I don't need to sweat the timeline as hard as I do. I don't know. I think a lot of us as Star Wars fans are trying to figure out what good Star Wars is, and so it's a bit of a weird transitional time for the fan base. I'm not gonna lie, I've been in a bit of a Star Wars slump lately. As some of you know from my last stream, I needed to step away from this channel and figure out my relationship with this media. I think I'm in a better, healthier place with it now, and I can feel my motivation is returning. I don't know if it was Andor or the time away, but I'm starting to enjoy it again. Knock on wood. I don't want to jump the gun, because I've been let down before, but I think I can feel a little bit of hope stirring for Star Wars again. I know Disney has done an excellent job of developing hype and then under-delivering, but I think Andor was the opposite. A no-name character with little to no hype around the show, and over-delivering. Or maybe that's not over-deliver, it's just delivering a good show actually. It's one of the best received Star Wars shows in a long time, but it's doing the worst in viewership. I find that really interesting, and I'm curious to see what Disney's going to do about that in the future. But I really do hope for a season 2. I wasn't expecting much, I didn't think the story had to be told, but I'm glad they did. Thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.